What's up, guys? ZiSotto here, and today we're doing something very out of the ordinary. A bit in the lights of Worlds, maybe, of what's coming up, and also in the light of me having made a tweet that was a bit controversial. And I actually, after that, got in a conversation with a coach. That coach was sLainy, and that's kind of why we're here today. And what we're doing today is we're talking about coaches and coaching in Smite. Specifically about coaching in the pro scene, not so much about coaching of an individual player. And with me for that are sLainy from CLG, Counter Gaming, and AlphaJackal from Rival. Hello.
Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Good talking to you.
Very good talking to you. Thank you. Thank you for being here. And a quick introduction of both of you from my side, and then you can quickly introduce yourself. If you don't know any of the two, which most of you probably do, but some of you may be more on the casual side. sLainy has, I think, I'm as far as I was able to find out, been coaching since around February 2017, at least for bigger names. Started with Valence Squadron and Ionix, which were previously Paradigm, then Noble, then briefly Wowie in the Ace, and is now coaching Counter Gaming. And AlphaJackal started coaching around September 2015. Initially smaller teams, and then the names that are more familiar, for most at least, were the teams around October 2016, which was Burrito first, and then Cyclone, which later became Rival, essentially. So stuck with that team from then on. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Am I missing something?
No, you got it perfect.
Other than that, introduce yourselves really quickly. Tell a little bit about yourself. Maybe how you can just kind of jump into how you got into coaching at the same time as well.
Do you want to start, AJ?
Sure. So, hey, my name's Andy Barlow. People know me as AlphaJackal. In terms of getting into coaching, I started off on a team with just a few friends. We thought we'd enter the Challenger Cup way back in 2014 just for a laugh. I think it was 15 or 14, I can't remember. But that didn't really pan out because people had to go back to university and the team sort of dissolved. And it was around that time that EGL, European Gaming League, were looking for some casters for their amateur league. I thought, why not? I'll try and see how it goes. To begin with, wasn't that great. But thanks to some advice from some players, I got quite good at it, I'd like to say. And funnily enough, Callus and Deathwalker, they noticed me and liked my analytical style of casting. So I went on and joined them on Men of Aeron for a bit. Bounced around a few teams after we didn't make it into the Smite Pro League. And wound up back with them in the end of Season 3.
Mm-hmm. And sLainy?
My name is Peter Silvari, known as sLainy. I had played Smite for since the beta, and I tried going pro, but I mechanically not the best player, and I ended up coaching a really long time ago, back when Panthera was still in the CC. I was coaching with the Broncos, which was with Jermaine, and like I said, we were against Panthera. We were the second seed. Unfortunately, obviously, as you guys all know, Panthera, now Energy, ended up winning, and then that team kind of dissolved. That's when Jermaine went to Le Myrmidons. Then I through doing that, I had met a few people, ended up meeting Fumble, became good friends with him, kind of hung out with him, spent time with Paradigm, did some stuff with them, with the community. Then they ended up changing their coach, Deza, and they tried me. Ended up joining Valence Squadron. That happened. That team didn't work out too well, so we made changes there as well, and ended up quitting that. Then I was off roster for a while, just kind of doing my own thing, and then Skilladon asked me to help them out with Noble. Ended up actually doing really good with them. I helped to improve them a lot, I feel. Gained a lot of respect. And then obviously after Noble kind of disbanded because of the new SPL season coming up, I tried out for CLG and things went really well, and then I've been with them ever since.
All right. Quick overview. Already going pretty in depth here. I think we can. One thing we should maybe point out, what makes these two interesting in context of this conversation is you're going to play, or your teams are going to play against each other, very likely, and kind of 100% predicted, but very likely, very early in Worlds. Technically in the, well, I don't even know what it's called, pre-qualifiers for Worlds or
placement rounds. I think
placement rounds for Worlds. You both have one of the international teams, as far as I know.
We have North American Smite minor league team Armada.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Okay. We have OCE. So
all right, and then if you beat those teams, you would be ending up against each other right away, which I think creates an interesting conversation in looks for what will happen at Worlds as well. Kind of seeing how different perspectives that we'll get today may maybe have an impact on those games as well. And with that, we'll transition a bit more over to the questions that the coaches have already seen. Both of you know what I'm going to ask you for the most part. You had the time to write down some answers, and we're going to expand on that a little bit and just bounce the ideas back and forth, basically. And we're going to start with being a coach. So one question that I think would be very interesting, because that's something we really don't hear much about, is what's a day as a coach like? Like, what time of your day do you spend coaching? How much of the time in a day? How much is other things? How much of a priority is it for you? How much of a job is it for you? AJ?
Right now, I'd say I do about 6 hours of coaching every day. About 3 hours of that is spent on watching scrims with the team, going over the scrims and giving advice and helping them to improve, looking to develop some strategies as well. And then the other half would be watching back over some SPL VODs or some minor league VODs or global series VODs to research the teams that we're going to be facing at LAN and try and get more of an in-depth look at them and see if we can't find anything about them.
Mm-hmm. And Sully, for you?
Yeah, it's basically the same. About 6 or 7 hours a day. Obviously, three to 3.5 hours of scrims. Then the rest is kind of research and theory crafting. Also, a lot of it is spending time playing Smite. I feel like all the coaches kind of have to be playing Smite a decent amount to be able to keep up with things. Otherwise, you can't really help out the team. So 6 to 7 hours, and then a lot more hours actually playing the game as well. So even if it's just casually.
Even as a content creator, I get that one. The actual work is one part, then the playing that's still kind of work obviously adds to it.
Yeah.
In that context, as we have two coaches here right now, how do you feel like, also in the light of theory crafting and all that kind of stuff surrounding it, are the relationships between coaches in Smite? Do you talk a lot to each other? Do you have a lot to do with each other? Or are you keeping strategies very, very secret from each other and try to even avoid them as much as possible in scrims to basically not show them? Or is it more of a, bouncing ideas back and forth a little bit?
I think for the most part, it's keeping things very secret. No one really wants to even have the opportunity to give something away. But I think most of the coaches, especially like me, Alpha, Hazer, and those kind of coaches, we all kind of we can talk very openly. We're all decent friends. So if there's an issue, even if it's outside of a team or we just need to talk about something, there's that kind of friendship. But theory crafting and strategy wise, it's very secretive as far as I'm aware, unless there's a secret cult without me.
He knows the answer now, but no, there's no secret cult. I think the closest we get to theory crafting together would be if a god is particularly strong or particularly weak to the point where they break the meta or just don't get involved in it whatsoever. We do talk to Hi-Rez in an open Discord about it. I think most recently it was Amaterasu. Got played in the SPL a fair bit. Every team sort of knew that it was going to be a priority pick, so when the cat's out of the bag like that, of course, we openly talk about it. We openly talk about what makes her strong and what we can do to help limit her power at the upcoming lands. But yeah, very, very secretive in terms of keeping strategies close to the chest.
Right. In that sense, we actually saw the result here. I think, especially on the casual scene, even though it was explained, quite a few people were wondering about the Amaterasu nerf, because really, as a casual, when you're not that involved with the pro games and you see this nerf, it's a bit, why does this happen? But obviously, if there's something that's discussed among the coaches as well and then discussed with Hi-Rez, it makes a lot more sense. When we're talking about being a coach, another thing that I think is interesting to know is, how much do you think a coach affects the game or the team? And do you think this is different for different teams? And the reason why I'm asking the second part is because once upon a time we had multiple teams that didn't really have coaches in that sense. They sometimes had a coach written down, but were kind of open about not really having anyone coaching them. Do you think that would still be possible, or how do you think that is for your team in particular? sLainy, you want to start here?
I think it kind of depends on the team. I think certain players are still need to get adjusted to coaching. I think even with CLG, even after the first few months I was on the team, some of the players weren't too used to having a coach, and were a bit more like against taking feedback that were given to them. Never like bad, but they just didn't take it as well as some people that were used to a coach. So I think it's definitely not even team by team basis. I think it's player by player basis with how receptive they are to coaching and receiving that kind of feedback.
I kind of just straight up agree with that. I feel that certain teams do take well to coaching, and certain teams do. I feel like they do need a coach. To answer the second part of the question, where you asked if there were teams that could potentially get away without having a coach, I think if the raw talent's there, they can, if they're open and honest about themselves. They wouldn't have a traditional coach in a sense, but they would be self-coaching themselves. So there wouldn't be that 6-person coaching, whatever. Wouldn't have that coach role, but there would still be an aspect of coaching about the team.
Right, so it won't be more of going over scrims together, but not having a coach looking at the plays, but your other players doing.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Okay. The next one is a bit more, especially one of the parts about the tweet I made, I guess. How important is having a story of the team that you're coaching for you in terms of recognition? Not so much in terms of how you feel about it, but do you feel that if you're with a team that has built up a story, I mean, this is especially true for you, AJ, do you think that has an impact on how much you are involved or mentioned in the scene as well? Or do you think it's more something that comes from your skill or your coaching skill alone?
I feel it's a bit of a mix of both. I feel like it's got something to do with good timing on my part, joining the team when they started to ramp up and started to become more of a force. But I feel like my ability as a coach helped them get there as well. In terms of if it's important to me or not, it's not important to me. Of course, I do like the recognition, I do like being in the spotlight, but I enjoy helping out the guys more so. I want to see them succeed, I want to see them be the best in the world, and irrespective of whether I have a storyline behind me, irrespective of whether there is, talk about me, I'm still going to do that job.
What's your perspective here, sLainy?
Obviously, I'm kind of the opposite of AJ. I don't think I have that big of a following. Not many people will know of me when they think of CLG. It's just kind of like the raw talent that people see or think of when they think CLG. They don't think of like a coach. Whereas when they think of like Rival, they would probably one of the first things they think of is Alpha. So I think I agree that I don't think it is important, but I do think it helps motivate you to play better, to coach better, because you kind of have that pressure where everyone is expecting you to help keep the team improving, and if you don't, then they will kind of look on you. I don't really have that pressure where people will, if CLG is underperforming, which we do occasionally, people don't immediately put that on me. Whereas I think in AJ's situation, if rivals start underperforming, a lot of people will start looking towards AJ. So I think while it's not important to the team, I think it is also it's helpful in its own way, where it keeps pressure and makes sure you're on your toes and making sure the team keeps performing.
Interesting that you say that, because we've seen a few cases in the past, even of coaches that were not necessarily extremely in the spotlight, that actually still were blamed for their team not performing. Merle comes to mind, where I always thought it was a bit of a weird approach when the team was just not working well together at the time. But I guess at the end of the day, it's also a case-to-case situation.
Yeah. That's the way I say it. Sorry to interrupt you. When I say that, it's not me. I don't think I'm excused if the team is performing badly. I just think it helps keep the mentality that you need to make sure you're always doing your best, which should be everyone's goal anyway. But if you're having another thing pushing you forward, I think that helps too.
Feel free to interrupt me at any point, by the way. If you have any thoughts at all, just throw them in.
Yeah.
We had one question that was more about strategies that I just want to throw in between we go back to coaching or coaching a team, which is going to be a huge section. When it comes to strategies, that's something that a lot of people were wondering about, that I asked to ask you questions. Basically, what makes you decide to go with an unusual pick or strategy or build or an unusual role for a pick versus going with more standard strategies? Is there a moment where it's just about, there's a counter and that's why you're doing it? Or are there moments where like, okay, this is the game where we can try something, or is it something completely different?
I'll start with this. I'd say most of the time when you pick an unusual pick or strategy, you'll see it being picked in games 1 or 2, in a best of 5 sets, for example. Mainly because those strategies are there to try and catch the opponents off guard and start to make them think a bit more about the picks and bans. You go 3 games in, they're 2-0 up, and you then pull out that strategy. They then know that if they find a way to deal with it and put that strategy back down into the ground, that they're then going to win that third and final game. They're going to win the set. But if you come out with that strategy, if you come out with the fact that, let's say, for example, Thanatos Solo was played by Space Station against Dignitas in Spring Split. They brought that out game 1 against the Xiongqui, so it was a good counter to the Xiongqui. And it caught Team Dignitas off guard, and it got them the first game of the set. If they waited till game 2 for that, there could have been a completely different story. They did bring it out again in game 2, but obviously by that time Dignitas had seen it, they had time to adjust, they had time to think about what would do well against it. So in terms of going back to the traditional and the standard picks, it needs to be a constant swap, I feel. You can't always play the jank, you can't always play the unusual picks, because teams will figure out a strategy against it quite quickly.
Yeah, another reason to kind of pick these strange picks is also make sure your opposition is on their toes. They can't just stay expecting one strategy. So if we were to play something completely crazy, that would always be in that team's mind. So they'd always have to be thinking about that kind of thing. I do think that there is a lot more reasons than it just being like potentially to catch them off guard or to surprise them. I think there's so many different reasons to pick a pick that might seem strange to other people, but when it comes to your team, it's not actually strange. It's something that you've spent hours and hours and hours practicing, and it's just another team has not practiced against it. So it might seem weird to some people, but to your actual team, it's not. So I think there's so many different ways that could be like looked at. It would just take hours to answer every single scenario.
I would say 9 times out of 10, you are taking what other people would perceive to be a unusual or janky pick, but in your case, it's something which you found to be incredibly strong, something that you found has been highly successful in scrim. So to you, it's not unusual; it's standard.
Yeah, that's how metas are made, right? Like they don't stay the same through the whole of Smite. The meta changes all the time, and obviously that's because of like patch changes and stuff like that. But it is also because of things that just get discovered. I mean, think back last year in solo in spring, it was just low pressure stuff, and then Deathwalker comes out with Deathstall Bologna, and that just destroys everyone. It's not like Bologna or Deathstall had been buffed or changed. It's just no one had really thought about it, and obviously that had been practiced and was shown to be destroying, and then everyone couldn't. Everyone just got destroyed by that strategy. So things like that get practiced, and then they just break the meta.
To expand on that a little bit, or emphasize it a little more as well, has there ever been in any of your teams a pick that was practiced for less than 5 hours and maybe even unexpected for you?
Yes. Remember back to Spring Gauntlet against Energy. We played Carly in game 3. We had not picked Carly in scrims at all up until that point. That was 0 hours of practice on the Carly. I said, I really think that Carly's going to be a good pick here. We all trusted in him. We picked it. Didn't know what to expect, and it worked out.
Yeah, we've also had that. I think that's actually been an issue with us, especially towards the first two splits. We would be practicing something all week, just non-stop, and not just one strategy, but many different things. And then we get into SPL, and we're like, "Oh, dude, that looks like such a sick pick here," and we just haven't picked it in like a month. And then we pick it, and we're not practiced with it, and then we just kind of get destroyed. That has been like an issue with us in the past. So yeah.
So now you would say you go a little bit more towards the picks that have been practiced based on that experience?
Yeah, I think we're very cautious with what we pick now, and there's a lot more thought into how we do picks and bans and what we're practicing throughout, scrims.
Mm-hmm. Right. With that, we can transition over a bit to coaching a team in general, which will bring up some of these questions in one way or another again. The first one that I have here is of a different nature, though. Has your coaching changed over time as you got more familiar with the players on your team? Has it have a big impact, or has it been a small impact for you? Do you completely like change up your style over time as well because some things are known, or are there things that just always come back?
Go first, Slaney?
Yeah, sure. It definitely goes by the players. You have to learn and adapt to how the players like to be taught. Every single person likes to be taught things differently. Even like on CLG, the way I like would help improve with Snoopy is just completely different than how I would give feedback to someone like Jigs or Hurry. So you kind of have to learn how each person likes to be taught, and it's not something that they really know themselves. So it's kind of something you just have to learn. Also, it kind of depends on the person because personalities, you have to like make sure you're saying things that fit their personality. You can't just so for example, one thing I could say to one person is just completely blunt and say like, you played this poorly, you need to do this different next time. But if I was to be completely blunt with that person, with a different person, they might just get upset by it and think I'm just being too blunt and rude. So you definitely have to make sure the feedback you're giving fits their personalities and the way that they like to be taught.
Which is something you definitely learn more over time, then, because you have to learn how the players will react to you.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say for me the question is slightly different because obviously with Slaney he coached many different teams over the same period whilst I've coached just the one. I'd say for me, again, there's the issue of having to approach each player differently. I know that some players would want the feedback given directly. I know that some players would like it to be given in a more constructive manner, as it were. But over time, you'll also find that the way you coach the team as a whole will change. To begin with, you'll work on fixing key issues with the team that stop them performing to their highest potential. And as you continue coaching them, you'll obviously have to go back and continue relearning those same issues again as the meta develops, as the player's playstyle changes slightly. But as you get better at dealing with those core issues and helping them perform to their best, that's when you transition back a bit further and help them more from the sidelines as a perspective. You help them with more of their mental aptitude during and after games. You help them with research. You help them with watching the scrims as a whole rather than looking at focusing on specific parts of the team. There's just so many different things that you can coach at an individual level that it will change over time to what your priorities need.
Yeah. Like help them grow as a person as well, even just outside of like, Smite kind of things. Like the more you play with them and the more you spend time with that person, obviously the closer you're going to get and the more like receptive they're going to be to taking things. So you can help them with real life issues as well, like being kind of like, just issues that, that they previously would not want to talk to you about. So
you're kind of becoming the dad coach at some point.
Yeah, it's almost like you're a counselor or therapist kind of thing.
I certainly agree with that.
Yeah.
I was going to ask about that actually because you're familiar with them. Some of the viewers may not be familiar with them anymore, but back in the day, in season 1 must have been, Titan had Captain Coach as a coach. I think it was season 1. And Captain Coach was known for not really doing much on the, from what he told me, not really doing much on the side of theory crafting, builds, strategies. That was still a part of his coaching, but the bigger focus that he had was definitely more on personality development, basically on making sure that everyone harmonizes very well. He was like saying to me that, it's more about the players feeling well, working well as a team together, and then they will do their job well and they know how to play. How is that for you? Do you feel like that, or say it like as a rough percentage, how much of your coaching is more game and mechanics focused and how much is more being a therapist, basically?
I would say around 60-40 in favor of actually coaching rather than being the sort of therapist side.
Mine would be the opposite. I think it would probably be about 60% therapy kind of thing, and 40% in game. I think my team is very like. I mean, they're known. You know, it was a super team when it was formed because the players were all like really, really talented. But it's making sure that they mesh correctly and that they're doing well mentally. So yeah, I would say mine's the opposite, where it's 60% counseling and therapy and about 40% in game. But obviously, they're both just as important as the other. So
that is very, very interesting to hear, especially seeing how both teams also developed from, I would say, different backgrounds. Like Rival was more a team that were kind of, I think, friends mostly from the start, or worked really well together from the start. For them, it's more about building up the skill and the teamwork, from what I could tell, at least from an outside perspective. Whereas with CLG, like you said, you have more individual strong players that you then have to get to actually work together.
Yeah,
I think that's very, very interesting to see how much that makes a difference in terms of not only being a coach, but also maybe what kind of coach the team needs. Like one team may need more of a teacher kind of coach, and the other one needs more of a friend kind of coach, so to speak, basically. Yeah. Very interesting. Thank you. What on that same topic still? What would you do, or what do you do if players disagree, but to a degree where it's not just like saying I don't agree with what you're doing, but rather they just don't want to follow any of the advice you give, or just tell you that you're wrong and don't care about your opinion?
I would talk to them frankly about what I feel the strength of that strategy would be. Obviously, I'll just straight up say, for example, a Wheelix ADC I think is a strong pick. It's just like an example. Team would then probably rightly say no, she's not. And at that point would then have sort of like an open discussion about the benefits and drawbacks of the pick and of the strategy. And afterwards we would come to sort of an agreement between the six of us about what we think of that pick. And it wouldn't be this shouty argument calling everybody an idiot or calling people names or anything. It would just be a civilized discussion between six friends.
Yeah, it's basically done the same way for us. If it was like an in-game strategy, let's like take a different road than AJ's, where his is a god. Let's say like I suggest a pathing, and to everyone else it seems completely ridiculous and like why would we ever do that kind of thing. We would also then just have a discussion about it, but we would make sure that we test it thoroughly. Rather, we wouldn't just have a discussion, and obviously AJ probably does the same thing, but we would test it thoroughly and make sure we know the ins and out of that before we make a final decision. We wouldn't just say like, no, that's bad, we're not doing it. And then even if we look at the pros and cons, unless it, it's completely ridiculous, like, like just something absolutely crazy, like just kill the tower at level 1 or something. But we would make sure we test it thoroughly and we know the ins and outs before we give a final decision on it, which obviously can be time consuming. But, I think when a suggestion is brought up and the players know that they're being serious about it, that we shouldn't just be brushing that off, and we should respect their opinions and what they're bringing. So,
in that same sense, once again, what if, or has this ever happened maybe in the first place? You were discussing a strategy or maybe even just a draft or something, but then going into games, were there any situations where a team decided to completely go against that strategy, against what you planned? And if yes, what was the outcome of that?
Well, it's always good. Obviously, you need a strategy going into a game, but the game evolves even just in game, and you can't always stick to the same strategy. So I think that actually probably maybe AJ's thoughts on it are different, but I think an overall strategy can change even in game, and it happens quite commonly. So I don't think it's something. I don't know the best way to say it. I think because the game evolves, it's very hard. It's very weird to think about that kind of thing, just because so many things change and they can't always follow that strategy to a T. As long as they're following the overarching game plan that we have, then that's the biggest thing. And then obviously if that isn't followed, then that's just something we need to discuss after the team if that was the right thing that we had done.
Mm-hmm.
I think the answer is pretty much the exact same. There's always an overarching plan going into the game, and that plan is obviously going to involve some little details that we're going to try and execute, whether it be getting control over a certain side of the jungle, or getting certain picks at certain times, or looking for objectives at certain times. But obviously, things change. We could take a botched engagement on one of those picks that we're looking for. We then have to switch up strategy because the person that we're looking to put behind is now ahead. Could be times where we're looking for an objective and we rival it, for example. And it's all about looking to adapt and adjust. If they're able to, follow that overarching game plan, like I said, with not being able to follow the many different objectives, then that's absolutely fine. That's what you try and teach as a coach. You try and teach that adaptability. Because the games aren't going to go as you plan them every single way. And if you're trying to tell them to do it every single way, the exact plan you should be following from minute 1 to taking down the Titan, you're not actually coaching.
Or you're just a fortune teller.
It sounds very. Are you saying that world is rigged and is already scripted?
Well, obviously.
No, you have to talk to Hindu Man about that one.
I have a question from a viewer that kind of goes in the same direction as well. I'm going to rephrase it slightly here. You already mentioned that you mostly give suggestions to the players and you discuss things together. But are there times when you actually just straight up give orders to the players on things where you maybe can't come to an agreement and you just do that at least for one game in scrims?
I think if it comes down to the discussions we're having before and it's not going anywhere, for example, we're discussing it for 20 minutes and we still don't know if it's going to be good or bad, I'll step in and go, no, we are going to be trying this strategy out, or no, we are not going to be trying this out. There's not enough time between now and Worlds, for example, to try the strategy out. We're going to put it to the wayside, maybe do it after Worlds or something if we're going to look to bring it on after. But it's only in extreme situations. There hasn't really been a time recently where I've had to interject and basically put my foot down and have an order, because we're at a point where we're open and frank with enough that we can come to decisions very quickly.
Yeah, it's basically the same for us. If there's an argument and it is going on and on and on and isn't ending, and we don't see an end in sight, that's when I'll just step in and say this needs to end here. We're just going to do this, which is basically what AJ said. But I think the role as the coach is kind of to be that person. Is when the team cannot make a decision amongst themselves, that's when the coach, which I think usually should be the authoritative figure, steps in and just makes the decision for the team. But I think that is so rare, and if that is happening commonly, then that's just a massive issue with the team outside of the argument that they're having. So I think I can't even remember a time when that would have had to have happened with us, outside of maybe if we're wasting too much bank time. I will just say, like, pick this character. So yeah, I think that's like a rare issue that shouldn't be happening. But it does have to happen where the coach has to step in and just kind of put their foot down and say, we need to just do this, or we need to end this conversation, kind of thing.
On the note of being an authoritative figure to the players, how much are you, or if at all, are you involved with the players' behavior outside of the scrim? So, for example, their behavior towards other players in ranked, if they write anything what somebody complains about, Twitter or whatever. Are there situations where you step in directly and give them a talking, if that ever happens in the first place? Or is this something you think is more a job of the org or of Hi-Res and not yours as a coach?
I think it absolutely is something which you have to do as a coach. If you are there giving advice and talking to them and making sure you understand why they're in that sort of mood and why they're tweeting out these certain things or saying these certain things in ranked, then you aren't getting a full understanding of the player, and you then will be able to do your coaching job as efficiently as you want to. I can't remember the last time I had to step in and talk to somebody's behavior outside of scrims, but I think the last time was with Vote when he got a warning, being a bit too toxic and ranked. So obviously I did, talk to him about it, made sure I understood why he was being that way, but if somebody is being that way, you have to talk to them as a coach. There's no two ways about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that that's not even just a coach thing. Maybe I'm probably just a bad person to talk about it because I get I'm not the friendliest person. And
BMing coaches,
yeah, yikes. But yeah, I've definitely I don't think I've been anything, obviously not ban worthy, but I've had my team, players on the team say you probably shouldn't, be that.
The team is coaching you.
But outside of just toxicity kind of thing, I have had to talk to a player about maybe you shouldn't tweet that, it's probably giving away too much, or make sure you don't say this publicly, or Fine makes a lot of videos, so I haven't had to do it, but it's something that could potentially come up if Fine puts out a video and he said something that gives away too much information. I could definitely talk to him about that and say make sure you just try and retract that statement if you can. So yeah.
To expand on that, because I haven't really written down a question for that, but Hi-Rez had this whole deal with content creation. I don't know how much is still upheld, but how much are you involved in that? How much of that are you encouraging, or is it something that you leave to the org? sLainy, start, because you already...
It's just a team thing. People will, say, do you want to stream together now? And but other than that, it's not really enforced. No one on our team really enjoys streaming outside of Fine. And it's something that they just, kind of hate, honestly. So and everyone understands that, so no one kind of pushes it on each other. And we all respect each other's opinions on it. So yeah, I don't think it's anyone's issue. If the org brings it up, then we will. But I think even the org understands that our priority is getting better at the game and not content creation. So I think that's kind of just a, I don't know. Maybe we're different than a lot of the teams. I know a lot of players don't like streaming, but none of us really do it other than Fine.
I'm sort of in a different situation where we have 3 players on the team who stream semi-regularly to regularly. And I do, at the beginning of when I would join the team, I did try and encourage them to stream a bit more, look to expand their public profile beyond just playing the game. And I respected the decision not to. I had, as I said, these open and frank talks to them about streaming and about putting out content, and I didn't push it on them. I just said my piece about it, what I thought they could benefit from it. Eventually Death and Ice and Wolfie took that to heart and started streaming, and they sort of enjoy it, and they're sort of continuing to do so afterwards. But if it came down to sort of an organization or Hi-Rez pushing for more hours and more content being pushed out, then I would again have a talk with the team, see if they wanted to do so, and if not, I would try and push back against the demands and say our priority is to win worlds, not create content.
Yeah, basically exactly the same. Yeah, I agree with that.
Very much understandable, especially as a content creator. I think the burden of creating content on a pro player that has scrim, has to practice outside of that, and has to play the pro games is something that they really have to want to do, and they really have to have the time to do it outside of Smite, where many of them are still in school or studying or something and are busy otherwise anyways.
There's also the point where this isn't me taking shots at pros, but some of the pros just aren't interesting to watch. They can be the funniest person ever, but when you're streaming, you kind of almost feel like you have to be talking a lot and making conversation. But when it's forced, obviously you're going to be way worse at doing it if you feel forced to do it. Obviously, some people can just do it naturally, to talk for ages and just make jokes nonstop. But if someone's to force themselves to make jokes and be talking all the time, it's just going to be way worse. So and that makes players uncomfortable. And I never would want to make any of my players uncomfortable. So that's why I would never force any of my players. I can tell them, I mean, they already know that if they want to stream, they can, and that everyone will support them for it. And, but unless the org is pushing for it or Hi-Rez is pushing really hard for it, I would always stick up for the players and make sure they only doing it if they feel comfortable to.
That actually weaves perfectly into the next question, being where something also related to communication or to just being yourself. Somebody wanted to know, how do you help players that struggle with communication in scrims? How do you help them improve on that?
I would say for myself, it would be don't be afraid to talk, and don't be afraid of dead noise. One of the big things is I feel when players try to improve their communication, they talk too much and they say things which don't really need to be said over and over again. And one of the best things I could think of in terms of trying to answer this question would be, say for example you're in duo lane, and they're rotating to rep buff. Ask yourself, if I was in middle lane, would I want to know they're a rep buff? And if the answer is yes, I would then say it. If I was in mid lane and I didn't want to know they're a rep buff, I just want to continue farming and go over to a different side of the jungle, then it's not information that's worth putting out there. Obviously, that's a very simplified example, because it's a buff invade. People will want to know about that every single time, but there's always things to talk about, and there's always things which don't need to be said.
So my answer for this question might not be what that person wanted to hear, because maybe they're asking for themselves, like on how they can improve. But it kind of goes back to how I was saying before with every player needs to be coached or taught in different ways. So we had that issue in the past. Snoopy was a pretty quiet dude, and I had to find a way that Snoopy would be receptive to taking feedback on when he could talk. And for him personally, it turned out the best way for me to do it was to be focusing on him. And when I see a time where he should have called something, like maybe it was active usage or enemy rotations, I would point it out to him straight away. Like messaging him in game or messaging him on Discord with his Discord open on his other monitor, so he can see that message instantly. So he can instantly like process and say, "Oh yeah, that's like right. I can think about that." Whereas like in another scenario, this is like random, but if it was like with Jigs, I could potentially bring up like after the game and say, at this time at 19 minutes 40, Jigs, you didn't communicate that you were going to use CC on somebody here, and he would be able to remember that and he could use that productively. But whereas if I had given that to Snoopy, he wouldn't be able to, it wouldn't help him. So it just comes back to like every player needing to know, every player having their own way on how they're coached, and that's up to me to find out how they need to know that or how they need to learn that. So
I think it's extremely interesting how far to the finest detail this goes. I think especially the example very describes it very well. Like, it paints a very good picture of. I know that I would be the type of person who would have to know it in the moment as well. Remember, that happened 20 minutes ago. That's not on my mind anymore. The game's over right now. So I think it's really cool to understand just on what detail you have to understand the players as well. How good you have to know them to really know what works best for them.
Yeah, it's when a coach first joins a team, it's going to be a lot different than when they join a team. It's going to be a lot different when they first join the team to a year later. The way they coach, they're going to be a lot more comfortable with the players, and they're going to be able to give a lot better advice because they just know the person better. So,
I have another question from a viewer. This one is a bit more broad. I'm not quite sure if this is possible to answer even, but the question is, how can you improve the consistency of your team's performance?
I guess probably be a good question for me to answer, just because that's probably what a lot of people would say. I think the best way for consistency is making sure that everyone knows the reason why something went wrong. So if, for example, let's say our team consistently loses a team fight, across sets, and obviously there can be other issues or other inconsistencies. But as long as you lock down what your inconsistencies are and you know what they are, then you can improve on them. So the biggest thing to fix inconsistency is to find out where you're inconsistent. You can't. Obviously, there's issues like if you're inconsistent in loads of different aspects. But by then, it's probably not an inconsistency issue. It's probably some other overarching issue that maybe you're just not aware of. So just finding out what those inconsistencies are, and then working as a team to try and come to a resolution to what those are, is the best way to fix inconsistencies. And that's what we're currently doing now. So
I'd say the biggest thing is to just be honest with you and your team. There's no point in trying to impress your team and impress your coach by obscuring the truth to make yourself look better, because you're only going to look good in the short term in that case, and only really the very short term, because we as coaches will see through the deception, we'll see through what we think is the issue. And the best way to improve is just to be honest and say, yeah, that team fight, I kind of did mess up there. I kind of went in a bit too deep. I kind of went too early, went in too late. And when people do admit those mistakes, and when people say that they did mess up, biggest thing to do is to not dogpile on them and just say, yeah, you ruined the game for us, way to go. It's to be responsible with them, and to say, thanks for saying that, we can work on that, and here's how we improve it, and go from there.
Yeah, I think that honesty thing is like a thing that needs to go across the whole thing. Obviously, AJ wasn't saying it's just for inconsistencies, but for everyone else, you always need to be honest with your team. Otherwise, you're never going to improve. You can tell your team every time, like, "Oh, I only died there to bullshit," but it's not going to help anyone if you're not being honest and truthful across, everything that you can be.
I'd say the only time you can really say you died to bullshit is if you get crit 3 times by 5% chance.
Or Yanis across the map, just walking out of base and gets smacked for 2k.
Both cases that have happened at some point. I remember all too well. Pros were a bit upset back then. To have a little bit of a more light question towards the end of this section. If you had to describe each of your players in one word, what would the words for those players be?
Oh god, it's like back when people made those tweets describing it.
Well, going from vote to death, I would go toxic, laughable, moneybags, unpredictable, and idiot.
Fine would 100% be troll. Horrorwind would be brains. Jigs would be brains with glasses.
That's 3 words.
Just don't put spaces.
Hashtag is 1 word, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Hashtag brains with glasses. Mask would be loud. Snoopy would be poop emoji. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
It's interesting how I feel like some of these descriptions may not have been true in the past as well. I think Mask at some point in earlier teams probably would have been the troll, but now he's taking
no one's more troll than Fine.
I don't know about that one.
No one is more troll than Fine. You cannot have a serious discussion with that man.
I remember a tweet you made recently. What was it? Well, can we be serious for a moment now and then?
Yeah, that's like literally the most relevant thing you can imagine. You think I'm trolling, but that is it.
All right. Moving on to a selection of random questions that I couldn't really fit anywhere else before we have some more overarching topics. Coaches and recognition. Again, something that kind of brought this conversation up in the first place. How do you think coaches can get more recognition? And I just got to follow. Sorry about that. And what can Hi-Rez also do about that? We know they've taken some steps with the season ticket, with the teams now showing the coach finally. But what do you think are other options for them to highlight the coaches more, and if it's necessary in your opinion in the first place?
I really like I don't know if it's something that Riot like implemented or did themselves, but I really like how after every picks and bans in like the LCS, they'll show the coaches shaking hands as they walk off a screen. I think that's like a really good way. And then they also in picks and bans will have the coach will say who the coach is. I also think another thing is I think a lot of the casters will mention certain coaches more than others, and this isn't me trying to make a shot at anyone. It's not even their fault. It's just who they know, so they'll say them more, and it kind of starts a snowball effect where they'll just start saying their name more, and then other people will notice them. So then the casters will want to talk about them more. Obviously, getting results, is mega important too. So if Rivals, a lot of things was for a while was their picks and bans were just so smart, and a lot of people will just credit that to being a coach's role. It's just like coach just completely leads picks and bans, so that must be mean AJ is just insane, right? I think just giving more recognition to coaches and just talking about them more would help. But I don't think that's necessarily something that they need to do. I just think that's one way they could do it. I think Cars is just talking about other coaches more.
Obviously, in my position, I feel like I am getting enough recognition, maybe a tiny bit too much. So obviously my standpoint comes from sort of like a biased position, but I feel like if they were going to give coaches even more recognition than they do now, it would be following down the same route that traditional sports would go down, where and they have been doing pre and post game interviews, but it's been with selection players, selection sometimes the coaches in there as well. I would say the way that they would put the coaches in more of a spotlight and give them more recognition in their own separate segment would be to have the coaches do those pre and post game interviews all the time. I'd also say that maybe they might do this in the upcoming LAN, they might not, but I remember back in Season 4 and Season 3, they had some of the players go up onto the analyst desk. Again, some players like it, some players don't, so obviously some coaches would want that spotlight and some wouldn't. I know I would like to be on the analyst desk quite a fair bit at some of these LANs, so again, that's something that they could look into.
sLainy, you wanted to say something on that?
No. Important. I do want to say that though that Hi-Rez have done. I think they are doing a lot better now with like giving coaches recognition and more respect. Like a lot of the time, the casters will reach out to for analyst desks, for example. I've been offered to go on the analyst desk when I go to LAN and stuff, and sometimes I'll say yes, and sometimes I'll say no. And obviously, we are usually welcome into doing those interviews, but they will always give preference to the players, which is probably the right thing to do. But Hi-Rez are getting way better. Like this year is the first year that Hi-Rez has considered international coaches as like a sixth player. Whereas previously, if we were in the same situation, CLG would have had to have sent me out to Hi-Rez, and we would have had to dealt with my own hotel room rather than Hi-Rez providing that kind of stuff. So yeah, I think Hi-Rez have gone way better.
I would say that right now they're doing a lot for the coaches, and I can't thank them enough. I can't thank them enough for it. And if they gave any more, I would obviously welcome it, but I would say it's not necessary at this point.
I will say that you mentioned yourself, the perspective is obviously a little bit biased. That I feel like some coaches are very much in the background, and I'm not sure if they've been mentioned much at all. And to take an example that is not present here, or not make a conversation about how much sLainy and AlphaJackal seem, but rather what about other coaches, or what about coaches in general? I was introduced to Cardiac United's coach at Worlds, and I felt kind of awkward in hindsight, not even knowing who he was at all. And I was just like, why have I never heard a word about him before? And that was last year. And this year, I think I wouldn't have been able to miss out on him being the coach in the same way. I think
it's because some coaches just prefer being in the background and prefer their players having the spotlight. Again, that's a fine thing to do, because some players will be more receptive to having the spotlight on them. Some players want to have that attention on them, and that's what drives them to perform better. And you as a coach taking it away from them slightly, that's something you should be looking at.
I also think another really big thing is how the coach performed when they joined and how much the team improved when they did join. I think when a coach joins a team, there's always going to be improvement, assuming that the coach is doing their job. But maybe it's not something that people will be able to see because maybe it doesn't affect in-game stuff. Obviously, that's the goal, but let's say, for example, when with your example with Cardiac, when Cardiac had joined E United were already a really established team. I think that they were already the number one NA team at the time. I don't even know much about when Cardiac joined. But
it was pretty under the radar for most people, I think. I don't know either. I'd have to look it up.
So it was just never spoken about because E United were already a powerhouse, or they were already a top team when Cardiac joined. And they were the best team when they won. So there was nothing much for the casters to talk about. There wasn't this improvement in skill. But let's say for when I joined Noble, which is when I started getting, casters spoke about me and people started actually knowing who I was. It was because Noble went from being probably one of the worst teams in SBL history to we ended up winning, I think it was Gauntlet. I can't remember the name of what it was. And no one had expected us. Everyone expected us to get knocked out by the CC team at the time. And then we ended up winning, and I think I was a big part of that. Maybe that's me being big-headed, but the casters probably thought that as well, that I made noise, helped the team. So they spoke about me, and that's when people started recognizing me. Sorry, hit my mic. That's when people started recognizing me. So I think a big part is when the coach joins a team and how much they improve when they do join.
Mm-hmm. On the note of coaching directly a little bit more, the current schedules for things like LAN or like the split in general, in terms of time-wise, in terms of when the games are and stuff like that, is that suitable for you personally? Is that good for you? Or if no, how could you possibly, or how could it be improved?
For me, it's perfectly fine. Mainly because I'm part-time in my other line of work, so getting time off work for LANs is easy, and in terms of the splits, it's being done in the evening most of the time, so I'm not at work anyway.
Yeah, my with me, I don't think I'm even allowed to answer this question. The reason it's bad for me is because I'm European and I'm coaching an American team. We scrim at like 1 a.m. for me. But if I was to join a European team, obviously it would be fine. I think the only thing that they could potentially do better is give us more like warning of what the schedule is going to be like. We don't really find out when we play or when LANs are until, maybe at best a month before it happens. So we can't really plan around like when we want to do things usually. So that's
I heard from a reliable undisclosed source, as they say, that there were some last minute changes for the scheduling around Worlds as well. I imagine that would be something that could be worked on in some way or another.
Yeah, that kind of thing happens.
Yeah, there were some last minute scheduling changes for certain people flying out. But I think that's the only thing that they really do need to improve on in terms of looking at timings, schedule, is making sure the information gets out to us as early as possible. Because obviously for me, getting time off a month early, a month beforehand is fine. I'm lucky enough to be in a position I can get that. But if I was in a different job and they would want it, say, 2 months in advance, I would kind of have to just shoot in the dark and hope that I get the land dates correctly.
Yeah, exactly. That's the biggest thing. We just don't get really any warning of when things are happening, so we can't plan like holidays if we wanted to do them, or spending time with family and things like that.
We have another question that's kind of unrelated here, being other regions. It's I actually went back to an old interview of yours, AJ, where you were talking, or you were asked. This was before Burrito, I think. How you see the potential of the other regions. Now, the other regions have seen a lot of changes in terms of, well, the popularity of the game, but also funding for the region and exposure and all that kind of stuff. Do you guys think there's still much potential left for the other regions outside of EU and NA to catch up?
I think that if Hi-Rez get a schedule sorted and a system sorted for them that is consistent throughout the year, that other regions can start to climb back up. But in terms of potential for them to challenge, potential for them to perform at LANs, I think you're really only looking at LATAM, maybe Brazil, to have that sort of potential to challenge some of the lower end Pro League teams. SEA and OCE, they need a lot of resources. They need a lot of help if they're going to get to that same level.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to player base. For example, OCE. I think let me backtrack a sec. I think every single region has the opportunity to beat any single region. But it comes down to 100% of what the talent is in that region. Let's look back like a few years when Energy was just dominating the scene. Every team scrimmed Energy and then got better off of that because there was this one powerhouse team. But in OCE, for example, if there's no, I don't want to be rude, but if there's no good players there, then no one's ever going to improve. You need talent to produce talent. It doesn't just come out of nowhere. So I think it 100% depends on the player base and how many people there are playing and the talent that is playing in the region.
On the note of player base, we have, at this point, we have confirmation that crossplay will be coming to Smite, and we've seen the first steps being taken on PC, on Xbox, on Steam. that will make that possible. It will be optional in the beginning. You kind of can opt out of crossplay if you want to, but you're automatically opted in by default. Do you think that this will somehow have an impact on the pro scene at all, depending on how it's implemented, obviously?
I think there'd have to be certain regulations about the pro scene. For example, if we have a team that has 4 players on PC and 1 player on Xbox, they'd have to make sure that at LANs there is the availability for us to have 4 keyboards and a controller. Or right now, it's separated by your console or you're on PC. So the keyboards are mandatory, or the controllers are mandatory, and that could potentially open the door for these other things to happen, like people playing on Xbox but using a keyboard and mouse to get a distinct advantage on their system. But in terms of affecting the pro scene's player base, I think if the players on Xbox are good enough to come and challenge some of the players on PC, then all power to them. It will improve the pro scene, it will make it stronger.
Yeah, I'm pretty ignorant because I don't know much about the Xbox scene. But if I just go off of, or the PS4 scene, excuse me. But if I go off of what I do know about the teams and like watching the games I have watched, which isn't a lot, but I've watched a fair few. I think there would be literally zero change in the pro scene. I don't think any of the Xbox players on a controller would be good enough. I think a lot of the reasons why console players work in PC is because they would bring something outside of mechanical skill, like be it comms or just being a great teammate in general. I think making the transition from using a controller to keyboard is a lot easier than the other way around. So I think it would just be easier for them to just go to keyboard anyway and not have the disadvantage of playing on a controller. So I just think there's and that could happen already. If a console player wanted to do that, then they can do that now.
Like inbound.
Yeah. Obviously, unless their computer isn't good enough. But usually, I think if any of the top console players could, like in the Pro League, could probably just afford a PC at this point, even if it's just a bad one, just to run Smite. So I think if the players wanted to do that, they could, but they don't, other than like inbound and keys and stuff. But I don't think there'll be any difference in the Pro League. I think all the players will stay the same, except maybe 1 or 2, if players quit.
Agreed.
All right. We'll find out, I guess. But I guess I'm still biased here as well. I know that at least AJ is not quite as biased against console in that context, but I feel like the mechanical difference between a gamepad, or a controller, and a keyboard will, on that level of play, probably be an issue in one way or another.
Like, I don't want to come across as rude. I think obviously the Xbox players are better than me. Like the top ones. So I just don't think that they can compete with people on keyboard and mouse. I think they have too much experience with, because PC is usually just metas ahead of Xbox. I think they're just too good at what they do, and that there's no reason for them to be able to be replaced by someone that's using a controller. There's just a disadvantage.
Another note of examples that have made it, there are also quite a few examples of players that switched from console to PC, from console pro scene, and didn't actually end up getting anywhere and just kind of dropped out eventually. Yeah. But we'll see. It's going to be an interesting development. But at the end of the day, the only thing that I feel like would have a major impact here would maybe be something like putting the leagues together. But I don't imagine Hi-Rez doing that.
Well, even if they did do that, then no one from the Xbox teams or PS4 teams would get picked up anyway. I would be my initial guess. Obviously, I could be wrong. But no one would change anyone for an Xbox player.
I think there would be a very, very slight chance, but as you said, the chances of it are very, very low to extremely low. You'd still have teams that are all Xbox trying to compete against teams that are all PC. If they can win, then obviously they deserve to be in Pro League. They deserve to be in the minor league if they're there. But it'll just be difficult to see a team splitting up just to pick up a couple of Xbox people.
Yeah. Like if I was a coach and let's say there's this insane console player, like he was just like the best teammate ever. He had like literally god tier comms, I wouldn't be saying let's pick him up and let him use a controller. I'd be saying let's pick him up and try and convert him over to be able to use a keyboard and mouse.
Yeah.
At which point he could just be doing that now anyway. So
Right.
there's like, that's why I don't think them merging the scene would.
I think it gives a tiny bit more exposure to the players in terms of like a ranked scene.
Yeah.
So players might be able to get recognized a bit easier, but like you said, you'd still want them to use a keyboard and mouse.
That would actually be interesting if we'd end up with a shared leaderboard, and in that leaderboard you can see if somebody's playing on console or on PC, and then you have this one console player being really high up between all the PC players or something. That would definitely get them some recognition one way or another.
Yeah, definitely. That was actually spoke about on the Pro Discord, like about it. One of the players was like, "Oh, I don't want these Xbox players making my ranked games worse." And then other people were like, "Well, if they're worse, they're just going to go down the leaderboard anyway, so it won't affect you like after a few weeks anyway." So, so I think it would be good.
Okay, transitioning a bit over to the general topic of coaching, or rather questions about becoming a coach. I want to like preface this with a question because, I mean, obviously you can always talk about the basics of if you want to become a coach, find a team somehow, maybe a minor league, something that is a coach, get yourself out there, blah, blah, blah. But to focus this a little more, if anyone wants to become a coach, what do you think are the most important tips from you personally to get there?
Oh, don't be afraid to talk your mind to the team. I know that there's a few coaches out there who would be timid to get their opinions and get their thoughts out there because they're there as the coach rather than there as the players who have a more in-depth knowledge of the role than they do. I'll also say that you have to be confident in your ability to coach the team. If you have doubts in your voice, if you have doubts in your mind, then your thoughts and your coaching will come across as a bit weaker. Even if you're not 100% confident on what you are saying, if you say it with that confidence, then it will come across better for you. I think the biggest thing, though, is making sure that you have some way of keeping track of statistics that you think are relevant to improving both yourself and your team. Say, for example, you think that keeping track of the gold that you earn on certain gods is relevant to improving the team, then keep track of it.
Sorry, let me just.
It's a difficult question.
Yeah, I think at this point it's a lot harder to become a coach like me and AJ are. We're not like the most, I don't want to take shots at you, AJ, but we're not exactly the most talented, ranked players. We're not like.
Ranked, what's that?
Exactly. Like it's I think the best way to become a coach now is to kind of get known as a player, so people see your skill, and it doesn't have to be like you hitting every ability. Just if you make smart calls in game, you can kind of translate that, and you can start talking to players, and bring information to them. Like that's the best way to become a coach now, I think. It's such an awkward question.
We can proceed to the next one. Maybe it'll.
I think the most common way that people will become coaches is by being brought on as a substitute for the team, and they'll sort of sit in on scrims, sort of look at the game, they'll offer advice, and naturally they'll transition into a coaching role.
Yeah. To go off of what like AJ said, add this bit in, is you can't be intimidated. I think I was quite lucky with like the first main team that I joined. Like proper team was with a bunch of really well established players, and they wouldn't really listen to me if I was to be timid and wasn't listening. Timid and wasn't speaking up about issues. And if I didn't put my opinion across, then I would just be removed. Like, you have to be able to say what's on your mind, obviously within reason. You can't just say someone's stupid. You can't just BM someone. But you just can't be intimidated by the person they are, because obviously when you first join as a coach, if you're like a complete rookie and you're joining a really well-respected team, they're just not going to listen to you if you're timid and intimidated.
Once you get to the point of being a coach, how do you improve as a coach? Like AJ kind of touched upon this already a little bit, SLainy, you can maybe expand on it a bit.
It kind of goes back to what you were saying before. You can about do coaches like talk to each other? You can definitely talk about how you go around coaching with the other coaches. I actually think I remember this last year when I had just joined Enix. I was messaging, and I think was it you had just joined Rival at the time, hadn't you?
Yeah, I sort of joined them after season 3 had finished for them. So
Yeah, so me and you were both relatively new to like coaching our teams, and we had both like spoken about like kind of how we go about doing things, and you kind of learn off of that. So it's definitely something you can just talk to other coaches about. And I'm pretty sure all of the coaches are really friendly to like giving advice on how they do things. Like I even myself, I get a fair few DMs from people just asking like, how do you get into coaching and how do you do it? And I'll give them advice on how they can.
I was gonna say you're gonna regret that. You're gonna get like all the DMs now.
I get
Me
quite
and
a
my
few-
5 friends have played 2 games together.
I get quite a few DMs like that as well, and obviously I try to answer them, but there are times where I'm busy and it just gets thrown to the wayside, and I don't get back to it. And if you're one of those people, I do apologize, but.
But obviously, like once you are like on a team that is known, even if it's on a CC team or sorry, SML team, the other coaches will like are happy to give you advice. I'm pretty sure I would be if another coach asked me for advice on how like to keep a team in order, for example, I would be more than happy to help them out.
I think one of the best things to do as well is just ask your team. If they feel like you're giving advice in a subpar way, if they feel like they want certain statistics tracked that you're not keeping track of, or if they feel like your research isn't what they need, just ask them and they'll tell you and they'll be honest, and you can respect that and you can learn to improve from there.
Yeah.
When you're coaching a team, how do you recognize the team's, like after coaching them for a while, potential or maybe the lack of potential as well? At what point do you say, okay, this team is not working out, I cannot possibly coach them in a way that's suitable, and I'm switching teams?
Never actually thought about that.
I mean, you've both done it at some point, more or less. I don't know how often you've left, or been left, so to speak, but
I think the last time I had this sort of decision was when I was coaching the Xbox team at XL. And what it came down to was sort of their attitude and respect towards both me and the game. If I can see that a player is, respecting the decisions that are being made, they're respecting the advice that they've been given, and want to strive to improve, then there's always potential for growth. But if they're not taking advice at all, in no matter how you give it to them, if they're showing up late for scrims, if they don't really care about how the game has gone, if they don't want to learn to improve, then there's not much you can do as a coach.
Yeah, I think for me it would kind of be the same attitude and respect. As long as they listen to you and respect your opinion and respect other people's opinions, then that means that they can keep growing as a player. If their drive is big enough, even at the start, and obviously it's not something they could even if you join a team and they aren't improving in months, but they're still focusing and trying to get better. If you're committed to trying to, like, you want that team, that is your team, and you want to improve that team. It doesn't matter how long it takes, as long as they're driven and they have that attitude to win. I think once those two qualities start going down is when you need to start thinking like, well, if they don't have as much drive and respect to win and improve as I do, then why am I on this team anymore?
Bit of a different direction again, being the financial aspect. When it comes to coaching, is it something you would consider sustainable? I mean, I think you're both still working on doing something else on the side. And how does it compare to the players? And is it very different from org to org, or is it just generally a side gig, so to speak?
I'd say it's different from org to org. You have a look at Dignitas and Obey, two ones that just pop into my head immediately. Their coaches are full-time. Mason made a big announcement at the beginning of the season that he was full-time. Biggie moved over to Europe during the full split to help his team get to the top, and they succeeded. So it really does depend on from team to team whether it is something that is financially sustainable or whether it's something you need to do on the side. And that just comes down to whether you are worth that full-time salary or not. I like to think that I am, but in terms of keeping the players happy, they wanted a bit of a larger salary than that what was being offered. So I decided to cut down on sort of what I was going to get paid just to give them a bit, so they would be a bit more focused on the game.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like a build up with how financially good being a coach is. At the beginning, it was obviously maybe it was just because we were rookies, but coaches were getting paid nothing and they weren't respected, probably because they weren't doing as much, which is obviously true. But as coaches have gotten better and they're doing more and they're getting more respect, we're being paid more. So it's kind of like building up, almost like it's a hill. Right now, for me, it's not sustainable. I get paid good money, don't get me wrong, but it's not something that I can live off of. And I would be more than happy to put in full time, which I kind of basically do anyway. I'm working, the same amount of time that a full time employer would. But it's not something I expect because I think the coaches still have a lot to prove of themselves. But I think that that's happening now. So I think that as we prove ourselves more, we'll get, better financially.
Sounds very much like the future looks brighter, especially knowing that it used to be basically common practice that most coaches weren't paid much, if any at all. Maybe got covered some flight costs or something, but
yeah.
Most coaches would just be flown over by higher res and maybe given a smaller cut of the prize pool than the players.
Yeah.
That was it.
Yeah. I also think like the big orgs that have come in, like for example CLG, they have obviously a League of Legends team, and the league coaches are really well respected and they're very well utilized. And with that they kind of like treat the Smite team the same, where they see coaches as really, really helpful. So they kind of like push the coach as well. Like they made the same level announcement for me as they did the other players. They treat me the same. They'll contact me and make sure everything's going good with me, kind of thing. So I think like more organizations treating the coaches better will help out as well. Because if I compare back to when I was on Enix, obviously I wasn't like treated badly, but I was definitely treated.
Did you get more than $1?
Just a bit. But like they would treat me definitely less than a player. They would just as a person, but I'm treated just as good as a player when I'm on CLG. So I think more orgs that start doing that treat coaches just as importantly as a player will also help out a lot, like financially.
Another question that comes with basically everyone who's ever been in a spotlight. As a coach, how do you deal with criticism, be it from the community, be it from the casters or whoever else?
I think, do you want to answer? Okay. I think a lot of people have a very, very, not very, very, I think a lot of people have a wrong opinion on what a coach does and how they do things. Like in League of Legends, as far as I'm aware, I don't know that much about it, but as far as I'm aware, coaches like kind of just run picks and bans. Obviously, they do out game stuff as well, but they run picks and bans. So a lot of people would kind of assume that that's the same thing in Smite, and maybe it is for some teams. But for our team, like in particular, I'm basically just a sixth person. Like I will put my opinions in, and I will say what things are good here, tell them the strats that we're going to be doing, but I will not say we should just pick this here. I won't tell them just to pick a character. But in a lot of people's eyes, they'll be like, wow, this draft is completely shit. It's the coach's fault. Which obviously it's, partly the coach's fault, but it's just as much my fault as it is the other players. And I think a lot of people, just because they don't have an understanding of what the coaches do, if they can't see critical flaws in game, that they will just put it on the coach because that's all that they can think of to do.
I'm sort of in that same boat. If a criticism comes in for the team, in general, I would have a look and see what the criticism was, if it was valid criticism or not, and sort of go from there. But if it's a criticism that I don't feel is valid, I feel like they've gotten it wrong. If they say, for example, somebody did a awkward rotation and cost them the game, when in actuality it was something completely different, it would be something we would still talk about and something we would look to bring on board in terms of improvement. But how I would deal with criticism, same way I would deal with any advice that I would be given. I would take it at face value, see if it's applicable or not, and learn from it.
Mm-hmm. Would you say, if you get directly addressed with it, either of you, would you just take it too hard, or would you actually respond and have a discussion with the people as well?
Would depend on the criticism. If I feel like it's valid criticism, or if I feel like it's something which I can learn from or have an open discussion. If I feel like it's somebody looking to just, poke fun, or something just to try and dig it deeper, the fact that we lost or something, it would just be thrown to the wayside.
Yeah, it's kind of the same. If someone is asking me a question or saying like, why did you do this when you could have done that? I'm like more than willing to have a discussion with them about like the thought process and why we did things. Within reason. I'm not going to give away, in too much information, but I will have a discussion with them about their opinion. But if it is just something like, wow, this team is shit, they need to, kick this person, or they need to change their coach. There's no point having a discussion with those kinds of people, because nothing productive is going to come out of it. Because I'm not above like other people. There's going to be people that are smarter than me and that know more aspects about the game than I do. Obviously, that's not the goal. I should try and know more than the average person. But there are going to be cases where someone will see things or know things that I didn't, and that they can help me improve as well. So there's no reason not to have discussions with players if they have valid criticism, or see something that I don't.
I think it's interesting to draw the line there at some point. I think one of the examples you may be aware of was, I think it was Verizial. Was it Verizial playing Arachne, and Zifiroli, the Spider Queen, making a long post on Reddit about how wrong he played her, which was worded in a way that did not give you the vibe that this post was meant to be productive, but more like a brag. But Verizial, I think, kind of came back to it and was like, there was actually some decent points in there, or at least he applied some of them. I think it's very interesting to see at which point do I know this is still valid criticism, or somebody can't express valid criticism properly anymore. But I think that's a deeper topic altogether. We can move on a little bit to a few specific gameplay questions that some people had. Not much, but one that somebody wanted to know was, what are some key elements to know when my team is going to lose a team fight?
If you're at a numbers disadvantage, if you're behind in levels, if you don't have ultimates or relics up, and they do. If you're ahead in gold and ahead in experience by substantial amounts, some of those factors won't really be a factor. But I think the biggest thing to have a look at is experience and gold. If you're behind in both of those by a substantial amount given the game time, then it's not going to look good for you in the team fight.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes throughout the whole game, though. I think that's kind of like something you should be thinking about outside of team fights too. So if you're like really far behind in duo lane, you just have to kind of, maybe you'll have to just fall back more. You can't fight this person. But in a team fight, I think the most important thing to look for is actives and ultimates. Because you can, if you outplay your opponents, and there's always that potential in a team fight, then the biggest thing that matters is relics and ultimates. So for example, if we have a really, really heavy CC comp, but they're like, 2 levels up each, which is obviously a really big uphill battle. But we have a really heavy CC comp, and they have one target character that is just like kind of destroying us. And we know that their beads are down, or we know we can still win this team fight because we can just single out that person and kill them. Hopefully, obviously, if things go right, obviously it's a massive hypothetical, but I think the most important thing is just knowing what relics they have, knowing your team comp and knowing their comp, and how it plays into each other.
Which effectively leads to this question being a lot more, or the answer to the question being a lot more complex than just it this way or that way, because there's so many conditional factors here that can really change it up down to the tiniest detail. This one is less conditional. Can Loki ever be a good pick in pro play in his current state?
I think so. Yeah, I think a question could be made now as an argument could be made up now as like, why is he not even picked up now? I mean, you're seeing mages played. You're seeing less warriors played. Obviously, guardians are really strong right now, but if those kind of characters can be played, why can't Loki be played? I think his biggest issue right now in the solo lane would be the sieging is really hard. And Loki doesn't really bring anything to a siege, whereas like a guardian obviously does. So I think if a team could find a way to make sieging easier throughout the rest of the comp, then there is definitely an argument that can be made that Loki might actually be decent to be played.
I think the best meta for Loki would be one that's got low CC and high burst in it. Right now we're sort of in one that does revolve around a bit of high burst, but it's also got a lot of crowd control and frontline surrounding it, with the Guardians being dominant in the solo lane. If we see a lot of mages transition over to solo lane and having double mages that aren't healers is sort of the norm, then you'll start to see assassins that can deal with those mages effectively be picked up a bit more, and you might even see a Loki every now and then. But as it stands right now, if the meta continues the way it's going, Loki probably won't be picked up.
Alright, so you heard it here first. CLG is playing Loki at Worlds.
Yeah. You know?
One
down.
One last question to like close it off before we go a little bit more, whatever else in terms of ideas you have. Just a look into the future. How do you see yourself? How do you see yourself in 5 years? No, but how do you see yourself in the Smite scene, assuming that Worlds goes decent for you and the team doesn't split up afterwards, which are always factors that can happen. Do you think you will try and stay in the same role as a coach for the same team, or will you see if you can, maybe if you even can talk about that, like see if there are other offers that are better, or see if you can get a better offer on your team, or try to transition to full-time? Any plans in that regard at all?
My plan would be to stay as part-time, but I would look to continue on with the current team, which I have, maybe for a bit more paid for right now.
Yeah, I think the same would go for me. I love my team. I think they're all great people. I think I would love to do it full time if I can financially get away with doing that. Then that would be the goal to do. Yeah, I think I think staying as a team is really important, and trying to improve as a team is just really big. And the longer that you stay together as a team, the better. So.
I love that you emphasize that you love the team. It would have been a big plot twist if you're like, I fucking hate my team. I want to get out of there.
I can't say that publicly.
Okay, we get the real message. Do you have anything else you want to add about being a coach? Something that people don't know yet, or anything else really? I'll give you a moment.
I think make sure that you respect the coaches that you might not have heard of. I think every single coach, thinking like right now, I can't think of a coach that isn't useful to the team that they're on. Even if you haven't heard of them, I don't think you should discredit them. I think every single coach in the league right now deserves respect, and I think that they all work really hard.
No, you make it sound like you're thinking about what sLainy just said.
No,
Wait, I don't know if they deserve respect.
Well, I can think of one coach beginning with an S and ending with a Laney that doesn't deserve respect, if you know what I mean.
Well, I have to agree. So,
yeah, I agree with that. I think that every coach does deserve respect and does serve a purpose for their team. I think one thing I will say is don't get into coaching just for the fact that you want to be part of a pro team. Be, this person in the pro scene who's famous and known about and getting paid mega bucks. Get into coaching because you want to be a coach. Get into coaching because you feel like that's something that interests you and that's what you want to do. sure, you can get into coaching to learn more about the game in a short-term stint, help you improve the game in the general, and potentially springboard your way onto a better team in terms of playing position. But if you're looking to coach seriously in the long term, make sure you're doing it because you like coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I think those are some nice closing words. Before we end here, do you want to plug anything?
Twitch.tv/MonkaS, baby.
Oh, Monka S.
I actually forgot that you had that handle.
No, it's like every time you join any chat and you type something, everybody just spams Monka S, don't they?
I just can't even talk in the LCS. The whole chat, my whole chat is just red.
If I'm gonna plug anything, it's make sure to go to EGL, the Electronic Gaming Store. Look at Team Rival and buy some decent merch before Worlds. And if you're at Worlds wearing some of that merch, I'll come take a photo with you.
Otherwise, you won't. Just for people with merch.
Yeah, only
only
don't even bother talking to him unless you have Rival stuff on.
Unless you're wearing a full Rival gear. I want to see the Rival socks as well. Don't even bother talking to me.
Are there any Rival shoes yet?
Not yet, but if they
you
are,
just paint it on. Just buy some white shoes and paint the Rival logo. But yeah,
I have to look at my wristband from last year. It's got somewhere.
Yeah, I want to just shout out to everybody who's stuck by us, even during the iffy period we've had during the end of this split. You guys are amazing. Also, if you want to have some one-on-one coaching, I am available on gamersensei.com. Make sure to have a look at my past tweets. You'll find a sign-up link where you can get $5 off your first lesson.
We haven't even plugged your Twitter. How are they going to find your tweets?
You'll put that in the description.
Okay.
But for real, it's twitter.com/AlphaJackal and twitch.tv/AlphaJackal1.
Yeah. Obviously, I want to shout out the org and all the fans. I know it's probably pretty hard to be a CLG Smite fan. We've definitely not met players' expectations. I'm pretty sure we're going to be able to prove ourselves in the qualifying LAN. AJ will be able to attest to that. Just wait. But yeah, obviously shout out to any fans that we have. You guys are awesome. Obviously twitch.tv/MonkaS. And then my Twitter is just sLainy Smite. So.
All right. With that, thank you guys very much for being on the show. I don't know if it's called a show, but thank you for
well, it's talk. A podcast now. It's 2 hours.
Yeah.
Have fun cutting this.
I just won't cut it. It's a solution.
Goodness. 2 hours raw files.
Absolutely.
That's going to be good for the analytics.
This is the part I'm cutting.
Just cut it up into 10-minute segments for each video.
All right. And with that, also make sure to check out the World Championship, where you will see both teams in action, and you will probably see a little bit of the coaches as well. And other than that, thank you guys very much for watching, and I hope to see you all for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out.